Hey Oort, Karko here. Hey, time for some Oort news and some Karko news. Starting off, the developers kind of posted an update today telling us a little bit about what they've been up to lately. Kindly posted by James, also known as Santa Claus, because he's kind of like the lead elf. The first thing they talked about was Steam. Steam's good to know because it is working, it is coming, but there's a few obstacles in the way before we can actually get it and use it, and they finally release it and start selling it in mass. The first major thing they talked about that they're working on is multi-threading. Currently, the game runs as is, but it's pretty much running single-threaded at the moment, and the performance isn't quite there, so they're still working on that. That's part of the reason we don't have it yet. So the other thing they have to work out is game ownership. Like, you may not think about it, but inside Steam, the developers have to write it so that it actually keeps track of the fact that you own the game, not just can play the game, and work out all the details related to the purchasing system. So the other thing they talked about is like instant access authentication, like how to delineate between those of us who buy the game and are instant access or above, and those who buy the game but aren't instant access, like the alpha and beta people. So that's kind of what they're working on at the moment. One other little tidbit down at the very bottom that I thought was interesting that would kind of tip you off is that they talked about a stretch goal of replacing the existing textures on blocks before they finally did the Steam release. So there's a pretty good possibility, the way I'm interpreting that, that the Steam release might be a little bit off, might be a little ways off. So, so that's something just to keep in mind. The next thing they talked about was the world builder, which of course is hugely important to me, and ultimately you, because I mean that determines what kind of worlds you guys wind up in and what you play on. The new noise functions that they've added are absolutely awesome. There's this one called Cell Noise, and another one where they've got a Distortion Combinator, which is really cool, where I can combine different types of distortion together. And distortion is really important because, like, when you generate things procedurally, it looks pretty boring because it's so smooth and so curved. A lot of what you see, like look here in Hell, part of how they get this like textured effect is that's the distortion that the map maker is using and applying to what would otherwise be like a boring hill. And so that's part of what gives it its feel and makes it look more realistic. So distortion is really important, and much better noise functions give me different things I can do with the terrain, like where it comes up out of the ground and how I press down into it to distort it and reshape it. And so the more of these things I have, the more diverse of kind of a canvas I have to work with, and the more different things I can kind of paint basically when I'm building. The other thing they talked about is caves per biome, and I want to drive this point home so much. These guys listen. Caves per biome was my idea. I asked for it explicitly. The reason I wanted it was so that when you go on to Keyford, like I could have like different shaped caves within the same system. So just like you have different biomes right now on the surface, I would have different structure shapes basically when you're underground, like in Keyford, so it's not just all the same thing. I kind of hacked around that with like version 3 before they told me they were doing this by like using different height map shapes and then using the same cave structures, so that as you go from the different biomes that I created, it appears as though it's slightly different because it's more open to the surface, but that's a trick. I'm using the height map to do that. Now I can actually change the shapes of the caves. So like right now it's kind of like a flattened circle or an oval, a three-dimensional oval is how I make the shapes in Keyford. This means that every single biome can have different cave structures, so I could come up with a variety of different underground shapes per biome inside Keyford. So that's really, really cool. Another thing they talked about was improving auto layout, which I'm so happy about because, like they said, it couldn't be any worse. Like, auto layout sticks the wires in such a way that you just want to pull your hair out. You never want to save and close a map because you're like, oh god, I'm going to have to rearrange everything the way I want it again. So, oh hey, that's pretty cool. There's a little creeper down there. So anyways, let's see. What else? improved auto layouts. Oh, block color. Yes. Block color is now going to be in the editor, which means I don't have to go out and I just don't have to modify the number values and the config file that's being brought in. They even had he even posted a screenshot of it where you like click on the color palette. It even lists the hex color value. Oh yeah! Now we're really getting serious. So that's awesome, and I'm really excited about that. And like a lot of you don't understand what the themes are inside the editor yet, but I'm going to try and explain that to you with World 4. James suggested I show that. Like the worlds are like, you can pick every color of the block you want. You can do that. But normally when you're doing art stuff, a lot of times you use like a color wheel, and the color wheel will determine like the complementary or opposing colors that you use when coloring an environment. And they have these things which are themes, and themes are basically the color wheel baked into the editor for you, and you just pick a theme and it'll totally change the way the world looks. And so that's one of the really big and interesting things, and they've added that, and this is a really cool vista. Sorry, got the ADD. Anyways, so themes will now be implemented in the editor itself. So a lot more of you that maybe didn't want to go dig in the config file like I've been doing and hacking around things, you will finally be able to change the color of your world and have some really interesting stuff that you can do. The other thing is any of you that have instant access, in case you don't know this, you can have access to the World Builder to play with it and toy around with it. And if you'd like help and support, I'd be glad to answer your questions on Twitter. We just had a new guy show up. I think his name was like Keo something or other. And I'm really excited because he's another terrain control user, so I'm pretty psyched about working with him. So who knows what awesome stuff we'll come up with now, especially with all these extra tools they're giving us. Okay. So the next thing is persistent MMO that they talked about in Oort News. You don't see this inside the editor, or I'm sorry, inside Oort, but this is probably the single most important thing that makes Oort Online what it is. To make an MMO, you can't just have a front-end server in a world. You ultimately have to have some kind of database backend that ties the player inventories together, keeps track of their items, allows them to move from world to world to world. And so they've been working on this. And in case you don't know, like regionally, your items do transfer now. So like if you hit P, let me do it, and pull up the server list over here, all the EU ones, your items will transfer between. All the US East ones, items transfer between. Now ultimately, they're in the process of working on tying the databases on each one of these platforms together. So when you go from ultimately EU to US to Asia Pacific, all your stuff's going to be connected. So that's a really big deal that they're working on that right now, and the fact that they even got kind of the regional component done is really exciting. So you can take grass from test is the easiest way to see it. You take grass from test, go to Luca, place down some of the green grass or the dark green grass, or you can even get red grass somewhere. Where is it? Can't remember. Somebody brought red grass into Keyford and placed it down. So that's another fun one that you can do. So that kind of starts to help you understand that like each one of these little grass types is unique, and that's part of the theme. It's because yes, it's a grass block, but it's a different colored themed grass block. And each one of those can be transported, and that kind of starts to give you an idea of the blocks that are moving between worlds and how they're actually kind of somewhat unique, going back to the themes. So persistent MMOs going on, then grappling hook. They didn't say a lot about it. I'm sad, but we know it's coming. It is very close. They've already shown it working in that Vine video, so if I had to bet, I think they're probably polishing it to some extent. There's probably some slight tweak to it they're not happy with before they present it, and so they're probably trying to iron out some small detail before they actually release the tool, and then we start making videos showing it off. So that should be pretty cool. Ooh, nice vista. So let's see, what else have we got here? That is grappling hook. Then they talked about art, and actually, Initially when I got to Ort, I didn't really care about art that much, but the more time goes on, this is the stuff that gets me excited the most, if anything, is like the actual art assets. Okay, so everything you see in Ort Online right now, I mean everything, it's just a placeholder. None of this is the final art asset. These are all just kind of temporary placeholders so they can get going on crowdfunding. Final art assets have to be developed by the artist. They take a lot of time. James talked about a lot of this, the different phases of it. You start out where you go from like concept art to kind of the translation element where you're figuring out what you can and can't do inside the engine, and then finally the final art asset, and then kind of like post-processing of the asset. One of the things he talked about, I think that's really important, is they're in the process of trying to flesh out and translate all of the assets into the game. So that means probably getting rid of most of those debug blocks you see. So you actually see ore and wool and stuff like that in all the different places it should be. The other thing that's really interesting about that is that they said that they have a stretch goal, which means, kind of hoping to do, but not really expecting to if it doesn't work out. Their goal is to have the final assets of some of this stuff in place before they release the Steam version. That's kind of good, kind of bad. Good because it means art asset production is apparently going to begin sooner than probably we expected. That's cool. Bad news is it probably means with as much art as the artist is going to have to do, they got a little bit of work ahead of them to replace all the textures. I mean, there's a significant number of them in there. So Steam release probably won't be, like tomorrow or next week. It'll probably be a little bit. But that being said, getting the finalized look of the game, and if it's anything even closer to the concept art, that would be awesome. So that's it for Oort news. So I'll go over and talk a little bit about Karko news. Because I'm working on developing multiple projects myself. First thing is Keyford version 3. And let me pull this up in the actual editor and show you what it looks like. Keyford version 2. I don't think I actually have the version 3 version because you can't see that in the editor. I had to hack around to get the waterfalls to work. So let me render the final version to give you an idea. This is what the coming version of Keyford is going to look like. And I'm going to have to crank this up. So here's what changed in it while we wait. I'll bump up the render size. Okay, here's what changed. There are now 2 biomes in the current version of Keyford. There's like a grassy structure, and there's like a sandy desertish structure. There's also grass, flowers. I decorated it much more. I changed the tree colors up. I think blue and red complement the yellow and green a lot better to show off kind of the rich color palette of Oort. There are large open spaces in the desert area, as you'll see in a minute. The desert area, I used a different height map, which had large caverns in it, and that opened up a lot more sunlight into the kind of lower cave structure. Let me show you, I'll spin around here. Yeah, here it is. So there's these like red narrow trees on top of it with these flowers on top of the sand for extra flair and fantasy. And what you'll see about it is it's a lot more dirt, so a lot more dark sand or dirt and sand kind of complemented with these red trees, and I forget which color flower I used, but it sharply contrasts the yellow. So anyways, that's kind of the cave structure. Then you might also notice up top, I killed my GPU. That's awesome. Also, let me see, hang on, let me pull it up. I'll load a smaller version of it. Apparently I didn't like that in memory. The other thing is I put grass up on top of the kind of traditional Keyford terrain environment, so it's now grassy. There's trees up there, there's foliage up there, so when you walk around it doesn't just look like a rocky hellscape, it actually looks like decent terrain. So that's pretty sweet. The last and most important piece you cannot see in the editor, because I had to do it by editing the text file by hand, is I found it from James that trivial water placement, like placing a block of water on top of the surface, is possible, but it's not necessarily a limitation of the editor. It is a limitation of the editor, not the actual renderer. And so I went in and started, replacing things like flowers and created them and replaced them with water blocks by editing the text file. And so what that's going to do is it's going to have waterfalls up here on the top that start raining down into each subsequent lower level of Keyford. And so you're going to have all these streaming waterfalls coming down in the sunlight. It is going to be awesome when they upload that thing. So that's Keyford 3. Let me show you something else I'm working on. Oh, I don't have it on this computer. Bummer. Okay, well, I'm sorry. I used a couple different computers to develop from. Let me go to Twitter and I will show you a screenshot and tell you a little bit about this one. So I also started work on the fourth world. The first one you ever saw, because it was a piece of garbage, which was Etheria. I may revisit that someday. The second one was Korea, which you saw different iterations of that one uploaded and were able to walk around in. Third version was Keyford. And then finally, the fourth version, I don't have a name for it yet. It's still a work in progress. But this is what it is, and this is what it looks like. So far, this is technically still a rough concept. So what it's designed to be is there are these pockets of green that are high up. And then down on the lower level, it's almost like a sandy beach with kind of, they are technically oceans, but large lakes, basically. Dividing them. And this is such a scaled down shot. I wish I had a larger one to show you, but most of the world looks like a giant lush jungle with sandy beaches surrounding it. And what's interesting about the beaches is I started experimenting with things like boulders, and down inside the lakes, those blue things are those glowing crystals. So at nighttime, when you're inside the world and standing on the surface, daytime it looks like this lush jungle with these high, pretty green mountains. But when it goes to nighttime, the water begins to glow because of all the crystal structures down below, and when you look down into the water, you can see the glowing crystals down there. It's a really neat effect. So that's kind of what I've been working on with my fourth world. And then another thing, which I sent off to the developers that we're talking about, is the concept of a city world inside Oort. The best way I can describe this to you is how I did it to them. Think about the first world of Fez. It was like a city stacked vertically on top of itself on a floating island in a sea of nothing. And I think that concept would work really, really well in Oort. Shoot. I guess I should have had this up in advance, huh? Here we go. Okay. This is what I'm talking about trying to do. First of all, my idea was that there would be like the way we'd build it is using a gateway, a single gate coming in from another world. And you'd walk through this gateway and you walk into a world where there's nothing but a small floating island. And then all of the community people would build the city on this island together, building on top of each other with, maybe some bridges extending out to some extent, but it's all in a very central area, and there's nothing surrounding us but basically the skybox and void down below. Fall, you're dead. And so it's interesting because this is a real radical shift from the way the existing worlds work, is because maybe the worlds don't have to be really big to be something that's cool. Imagine a small city, that takes up very little server resources, that you walk through a gateway somewhere and all of a sudden you're in this thriving city. Well, maybe this could be our home world, in places like Aeon, the Tower of Infinity. There's usually like some really pretty nice city that you always go back to and then go explore out of into the world. And I thought this would be a great place where we could all build together, build stuff on top of each other, and it'd give us something really cool for screenshot material to show off to people, and we could all kind of live there. So that's one idea I fielded to them. They're kind of exploring how to generate that, how they want to implement it. Another way I described it to them was we could have a small floating island, or a small island surrounded by a sea. Let me find the Steamshire. That's the perfect example. I thought we could do something kind of like this, where we have a small area of land surrounded by water, and from that we then built on top of and built on top of each other in a really kind of confined area to make a neat little city together. So that's another thing that they're rolling around, and they're pretty serious about. So then the other thing I did lately was the house design, actually taken partially from the Steamshire, which was this. So if you haven't watched the video on how you can build a cool house in Oort, I show you. It takes about 20 minutes to build this. It looks pretty darn cool, considering the simplicity of the design and ease of reproduction. So that's pretty sweet. I'm also working on a much more elaborate design for a house that's bigger and more time consuming if you're interested in that. And I'm going to make a video about how to build that, and that'll be a much more intricate house with more detail for the people that want to go a bit further for their home. And then also, in case you haven't seen it, I also made a video about how for new people in the game, so that when your friends get here, you don't have to explain every single thing about Oort Online. You can just say, go watch this video, and it will basically bring them up to speed on everything they need to know about Oort Online. And it's down here, it's this one video, a guide to Oort Online and the community. And that's really useful because it goes over how we communicate in a game, out of game, how the development process works, where they need to be to get information. So it's designed to be a comprehensive guide to get everybody going. So that's all the news for now, and thanks for watching. Talk to you later.